It started as a job interview, but the moment she said, "Call me boss tonight," everything I thought I knew about right and wrong began to blur. The elevator doors slid open with a quiet sigh, spilling soft golden light into the hallway. My pulse matched the hum of the fluorescent ceiling lamps as I followed the polished floor to the door marked Executive Office, Ms. Kawar. I'd been here before. Her home, her living room, the sound of her laughter drifting from the kitchen while her daughter held my hand. But this was different. This was her world, her territory. And for the first time, I wasn't the boyfriend. I was her new intern. The glass door was half closed. Through it, I saw her standing by the window, sunlight drawing soft edges around her figure. She was speaking on the phone, her tone calm, clipped, confident. The way she carried herself, straight posture, one hand resting on her hip, the other tracing invisible lines in the air, made the whole room feel smaller, like everything moved at her command. When she noticed me, her eyes softened, but only for a second. Then came the professional smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "You're early," she said, her voice measured low. "That's good." I nodded, unsure what to do with my hands. The scent of her perfume, subtle, like jasmine after rain, lingered in the air. Papers were stacked neatly on her desk, a silver pen resting perfectly aligned with the notepad. Every corner of the room seemed to mirror her, composed, precise, quietly elegant. She gestured for me to sit, then leaned back in her chair. "Here, I'm not your girlfriend's mother," she said, her gaze steady. "Here, I'm your boss. Call me boss while you're in this office." I tried to smile, but my throat tightened. She meant it professionally, I knew, but something about the way she said it, the small pause before the word boss, sent a current through me that I couldn't name. She began explaining the work, research reports, internal memos, deadlines. I listened, or tried to, but her voice was hard to separate from the person I knew outside this place, the one who used to ask if I wanted more tea, who laughed easily, whose kindness filled rooms. Now that softness was hidden beneath a layer of command, and it fascinated me. When she leaned forward to hand me a folder, our fingers brushed. It was nothing, an accident, but the warmth of her skin lingered far longer than it should have. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did and chose not to show it. For a second, I wished I could ask which version of her was real, the gentle woman at home or this calm, distant boss sitting before me. But before the thought could form, she said quietly, "You'll do fine here. Just remember, respect the lines, and we'll get along perfectly." Her words were simple, yet as I looked into her eyes, framed by the fading sunlight, I realized something. There were lines neither of us had drawn yet, and crossing them might not be as easy to avoid as she thought. The next morning, the office felt colder, quieter. I arrived early again, half to impress her, half because sleep hadn't come easily after last night. Her words still echoed in my head. "Call me boss." It wasn't the phrase itself, it was how it lingered, somewhere between command and confession. When she entered, the sound of her heels against the tile cut through the silence. She wore a pale gray blouse and a dark pencil skirt, the kind of outfit that made professionalism look effortless. Her hair was tied neatly, but a single strand escaped near her cheek. She didn't fix it. Maybe she didn't notice, or maybe she didn't care. "Morning," she said simply, setting a folder on the desk. "Let's get started." The task seemed simple enough, reviewing quarterly reports and making notes. She motioned for me to pull a chair beside her desk, not across from it. I hesitated, but she looked up, slightly impatient, so I obeyed. Sitting that close, the air changed. The faint scent of her perfume, warm, understated, mixed with the paper and ink. The ticking of the wall clock suddenly sounded louder. She leaned in, explaining the formatting. Her voice was steady, deliberate. When she reached across to point at a figure in the report, her hand hovered near mine, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. I pretended to focus on the numbers, but I was too aware of her, the calm rhythm of her breathing, the faint sound of her pen tapping against the desk when she paused to think. "You're quiet," she murmured, glancing sideways. "Just trying not to mess up," I said, half smiling. Her lips curved slightly, but she didn't reply. There was something in that silence, a flicker of unspoken amusement, maybe even curiosity. For the next hour, we worked like that. She guided, I followed. Our shoulders occasionally brushed when we leaned over the same page. Each accidental touch left a trail, not of desire, exactly, but of awareness. It was subtle, constant, impossible to ignore. Once, she dropped her pen, and as I bent to pick it up, our eyes met, level for the first time. The distance between us felt thinner than air. She blinked and turned back to her papers quickly, her voice suddenly brisk. Focus on section 3. The revisions there are a mess. I nodded, pretending not to notice the faint flush in her cheeks. Minutes passed, filled only by the sound of pens, the shuffle of papers, and the faint hum of the AC. Yet underneath it all was that quiet, tightening tension, the kind that builds without either person meaning it to. When we finally finished, she stood, stretching slightly. "You're learning fast," she said. Then, softer, almost as if she didn't mean to let it slip, "I see why she likes you." It was a small sentence, harmless on the surface, but it landed somewhere deep. She cleared her throat, gathering the files. "We'll review more after lunch," she added, her tone back to formal. I watched her return to her desk, calm, distant, untouchable again. But as she tucked that loose strand of hair behind her ear, I caught her stealing a glance in my direction. Quick, unguarded, and enough to make me realize that this boundary she'd warned me about wasn't quite as solid as either of us wanted to believe. The office emptied slowly that evening. Desks went dark one by one, voices faded down the hallway, and the hum of the air conditioner became the only sound left. I was still at my desk, finishing the last set of notes she'd given me. The city outside was painted in streaks of orange and violet, that quiet hour between work and night. Her office door was half open, and I could see her inside, still working, still typing, still impossibly composed. She didn't seem to notice time slipping away. I hesitated before knocking lightly. "Come in," she said, her voice lower now, tired around the edges. She looked different in this light, softer. The sharp lines of her posture had eased. Her jacket was draped over the chair, and she'd loosened her hair. A few strands fell across her forehead, and she brushed them back with a small sigh. "You're still here?" she asked, leaning back. "I wanted to finish what you gave me," I said. Her lips curved faintly. "That's rare these days." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit." I sat. She poured herself some coffee from a silver thermos and then, without a word, poured another cup and pushed it across the desk toward me. The gesture was simple, but it carried a strange intimacy, something unspoken, something that didn't belong in this office. "Long day?" I asked. She smiled without looking up. "They're all long." There was a silence between us, not awkward, just full. The kind that feels alive with everything neither of you can say. "I never really asked," I said quietly. "Do you like what you do?" She glanced at me, thoughtful. "I like control," she said. "It's safer that way." She paused, tracing the rim of her cup with her finger. "But it's also lonely." The honesty in her voice surprised me. I wasn't supposed to see this side of her, the part that wasn't in charge, the part that simply existed beneath all that poise. "You don't seem lonely," I said softly. Her eyes lifted, meeting mine for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. "That's the point," she whispered. The clock ticked somewhere behind us, filling the space her words left. The office lights had dimmed automatically, leaving only the amber glow from the desk lamp. It painted her skin in gold and shadow, and for a second, I forgot where I was. She caught me staring, and instead of pulling away, she held my gaze. Then she exhaled, looked down at her cup, and said with a small smile, "You make this place feel less like work." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled back. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city lights. Her reflection in the glass seemed distant, like someone she didn't fully recognize. "Go home," she said softly. "It's late." But when I rose and thanked her, she turned halfway toward me, her voice gentle, almost human again. "You did well today," she said. Really, for the first time, it didn't sound like a boss talking to an intern. It sounded like something warmer, fragile, real. And as I walked out into the hallway, coffee still warm in my hands, I couldn't tell whether the quiet that followed was peace or the beginning of something neither of us was ready to name. The next evening, the air outside carried the faint chill of early winter. The office lights glowed against the dark windows, and the world beyond felt far away. Cars, voices, life continuing elsewhere. Inside, only two lights remained, hers and mine. She was finishing a call when I stepped in to return a few signed documents. Her tone was clipped, formal, the familiar voice of authority. But when she hung up and turned toward me, that edge softened. "Still here?" she asked, her brow lifting slightly. I nodded. "Just wanted to make sure everything's filed before I left." Her eyes lingered on me for a beat longer than usual, and then she smiled, faint but genuine. "You're making the others look bad." We laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that doesn't fill the room, but warms it. She stood and walked to the coat rack, slipping on her jacket, her movements slow and unhurried. As she reached for her gloves from the desk, one fell to the floor. I bent down at the same moment she did, instinctively. Our hands met midway, hers warm, steady, mine slightly trembling. Time stopped in that small, ridiculous moment. The leather brushed against both our fingers. Her nails, neatly kept and faintly polished, grazed my skin. She froze. So did I? The world outside could have disappeared, and I wouldn't have noticed. There was only the quiet hum of the heater and the faint rustle of her coat sleeve brushing against my arm. Her eyes lifted first, steady, unreadable, but something shimmered beneath the calm. Then she whispered, almost inaudible, "Thank you." The words shouldn't have meant anything, but the way she said them, slow, breathy, like she was afraid they might carry more than gratitude, left me completely still. I handed her the glove, careful not to touch her again, though my hand still felt the memory of her skin. She took it, looked away, and said lightly, "You should go. You've done enough for today." Her voice was firm again, but I heard something beneath it, a small break in the control she worked so hard to keep. As I turned toward the door, she called softly, "Wait." I stopped. She hesitated, then simply said, "It's rare, finding someone who still cares about the small things." For a second, I thought she might say more. But instead, she smiled, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows, and pulled on the gloves. When she brushed past me on her way out, her shoulder grazed mine. Barely a touch. Yet the faint warmth that lingered after she was gone felt louder than any conversation we'd ever had. I stood there long after she left, the faint scent of her perfume still hanging in the air, not overpowering, but persistent, like memory. That night, I realized something had shifted, not visibly, not in words, but somewhere between two people who had tried too hard to stay polite. And sometimes, that's where everything begins. It was Friday evening when she asked. The office had that familiar end-of-week lull. Papers stacked, laughter echoing faintly from other rooms, people eager to escape into the weekend. I was packing my bag when her voice came from the doorway. "Do you have plans tonight?" I turned. She was standing there, coat in hand, eyes calm but uncertain, an expression I hadn't seen before. "Not really," I said. "Good," she replied after a pause. "Join me for dinner. We need to discuss next week's presentation." Her tone was professional, almost casual, but the way her fingers tightened slightly around her coat told a different story. I hesitated only a second before agreeing. "Sure, wherever you say, boss." That word earned me a quiet, knowing look. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight, just call me by my name." The restaurant was small and warm, tucked between glass buildings that glimmered like mirrors. Soft music drifted through the air, a low jazz rhythm that seemed to slow everything down. She chose a corner table, away from the crowd. For the first time, she wasn't framed by fluorescent office light. The amber glow from the candles made her look younger, softer, though her eyes still carried that steady authority. She wore a navy dress, simple but elegant, the kind of beauty that didn't need to try. "I didn't expect you to say yes," she said as we Saturday. "I didn't expect you to ask," I answered, smiling. She laughed quietly, not the polite laugh from meetings, but a real one, unguarded. The sound eased something inside me. The conversation began with work, deadlines, clients, strategy, but soon it drifted, naturally, into smaller things. Books she loved, music she missed, the places she wanted to visit someday, but never found time for. Each word peeled away a layer of the woman I thought I knew. "You ever feel like you've built your life so carefully?" she said, staring into her glass. "That one honest moment might break it?" I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, because I understood. For a while, neither of us spoke. The world outside the restaurant window blurred into streaks of rain. She watched it quietly, her hand resting on the table, close enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin. Without thinking, I said softly, "You don't have to be the boss tonight." She looked up, her expression unreadable, caught between a smile and something heavier. The silence that followed was electric, but not dangerous. Just human. Two people balancing between what they felt and what they shouldn't. When the waiter brought the bill, she reached for it first. "My treat," she said. "You've worked hard." I thanked her, though I didn't know what I was thanking her for anymore. The meal, the company, or the quiet, unspoken honesty between us. Outside, under the soft drizzle, she opened her umbrella and looked at me with a small, tired smile. "Let me drop you home," she offered. I almost said yes, but instead, I stepped back, letting the moment breathe. "It's okay," I said. "I'll walk." Her smile deepened, gentle, almost proud. "Good night," she whispered. And as I watched her car pull away, tail lights fading into the mist, I realized I didn't just want her attention anymore. I wanted to understand the loneliness behind her strength, the woman hidden beneath the title she wore so perfectly. The next few days passed in a quiet blur, polite greetings, short smiles, careful professionalism. Yet beneath every word lay the memory of that dinner. The laughter, the pauses, the way her eyes softened when she spoke about loneliness. It was as if we had both drawn a new, invisible line between us, one built not of rules, but of restraint. That Friday, a light rain fell all day. The city outside looked washed and silent, the sky hanging low and gray. By the time evening came, most of the office was empty again. She was still there, working by the soft glow of her desk lamp, when I stopped by to drop off the last report. "You're still here?" I asked quietly. She looked up, a faint smile crossing her face. "I could ask you the same." I lingered by the door. I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye. Something shifted in her expression, subtle, but real. She set her pen down. "You never do." The rain drummed gently against the windows. I moved closer, unsure why. Maybe it was the way her voice sounded, softer, almost tired, or maybe it was the weight of everything we hadn't said pressing between us. She stood, walking toward the window. Her reflection shimmered in the glass, city lights flickering behind her like ghosts. "You ever wish things were simpler?" she asked suddenly, without turning. "All the time," I admitted. She looked at me over her shoulder, her gaze unreadable. "You remind me of something I used to be," she said. "Before life became about control." Her honesty caught me off guard. I wanted to ask what she meant, but she stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint shine of raindrops caught in her hair. "I shouldn't say that," she whispered. "This shouldn't happen." Her voice trembled on the last word. I didn't move. I couldn't. For a moment, the only sound was the rain and the low hum of the heater. She reached out, as if to steady herself, and her hand brushed my arm. Light, trembling, and unbearably human. It wasn't a touch of invitation. It was something else entirely. A need for connection, for being seen. I looked at her, really looked, the strength, the composure, and the loneliness hiding beneath it all. "You don't have to apologize," I said softly. She smiled faintly, eyes glistening under the dim light. "I know, but I should." Her hand lingered, just for a heartbeat longer, then fell away. Neither of us spoke after that. She turned back to the window, breathing slowly, trying to gather herself. "I should go," I said finally. "Drive safe," she murmured. As I reached the door, she added, almost too quietly, "Thank you for not making this harder." The words stayed with me the whole way home. The sound of them, the sadness behind them. That night, lying awake, I realized the truth. It wasn't about crossing lines anymore. It was about how much both of us had already felt by trying not to. Monday came too soon. The weekend had done nothing to quiet the thoughts that kept circling in my mind. The rain, her touch, the way her voice had trembled when she said this shouldn't happen. I replayed that moment more times than I wanted to admit. When I entered the office that morning, she was already there, early, focused, and unshakably composed, as if nothing had happened. Her hair was pinned neatly again, her expression calm. She looked every bit the boss she was supposed to be. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual. She looked up briefly. "Good morning. Let's go over the client updates." Her tone was brisk, all business. No hesitation, no warmth, just the rhythm of routine. But the brief glance she gave me, a flicker, a breath, told me everything I needed to know. We were both pretending. The day went on like that. Clipped sentences, polite exchanges, no more and no less than what our roles allowed. Yet beneath every ordinary moment, the air felt charged, like the quiet before thunder. At one point, she passed behind my chair to reach a file cabinet. I felt her presence before I saw her, that quiet scent of her perfume, the faint rustle of fabric. My pulse betrayed me, speeding up for reasons I couldn't justify. When she reached over my shoulder to grab a folder, her sleeve brushed the back of my hand. Just an instant, but enough to bring everything rushing back. She withdrew quickly, clearing her throat. "We'll need to finalize this by Wednesday," she said, her voice steady but softer than usual. "Yes, boss," I replied without thinking. She froze. Then, slowly, she turned to look at me. There was the smallest trace of a smile, wistful, bittersweet. "You remembered," she said quietly. I wanted to answer, but words didn't come. She turned away again, composing herself. That afternoon, when I brought her the final reports, she was standing by the window. The sun was setting, throwing golden light across her office. For a second, she didn't look like a boss or a mother or anything bound by definition. She looked simply at peace. "Is this goodbye?" I asked before I could stop myself. She turned, startled, then softened. "No," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "It's just time to remember who we are." We stood there, the distance between us measured not in steps, but in everything unsaid. "I hope you'll keep growing," she added. "Beyond this place. Beyond me." Something in my chest ached at that. "I will," I said, "but I won't forget what you taught me." Her expression softened, her eyes warm and sad all at once. "Good work today," she said. The same words she always used, yet somehow they carried an entirely different meaning now. When I left her office for the last time that evening, the world outside felt sharper, clearer. The rain had stopped. Maybe what we shared wasn't meant to last, or even to be named. But in that quiet space between duty and desire, we'd found something rare, a kind of understanding that didn't need to be spoken. And as her voice echoed faintly behind me, steady, professional, and yet impossibly human, I realized it wasn't really a goodbye. Just two people, returning to their lives, carrying a memory that would never quite fade. Here's the final ending of Part 7 with a natural, emotionally fitting call to action that feels cinematic and immersive rather than promotional or abrupt, perfect for a YouTube short film story. Part 7, The Goodbye That Isn't, with call to action. Her voice lingered in the air long after I'd stepped out of her office. Calm, steady, final, but not cold. Maybe some people enter your life just long enough to change the way you see it, to remind you that connection doesn't always mean possession, and that sometimes the most honest kind of love is the one that stays unspoken. As I walked down the hallway, I glanced back once, the glass door closing softly behind me, the faint sound of her pen tapping against the desk. Life would move on, but a part of me would always carry that quiet moment by the window, where two people learned how to feel without crossing the line. Beat. If you felt that silence, if you've ever loved someone you were never meant to, watch the full story in the long video. The link's in the description.